In the underworld of Chicago, loyalty is rare, but betrayal is inevitable. Dominic Vanzetti thought he was untouchable, the king of the city surrounded by his most trusted lieutenants. He didn't fear the barrel of a gun. He feared the smile of a friend. But on a rainy Tuesday at the Velvet Room, death wasn't coming from a bullet. It was dissolved in a glass of aged scotch. He didn't see it coming. But the invisible waitress in the corner did. And in the time it took to set down a coaster, she changed history. This is the story of how one silent move saved a kingdom. The rain battered against the darkened windows of the Velvet Room, one of Chicago's most exclusive private lounges. It was the kind of place where politicians shook hands with mobsters and where a bottle of wine cost more than Sarah Miller's entire year of rent. Sarah adjusted her black apron, wincing slightly as she tightened the strings. Her feet were throbbing. It was a double shift, her third in a row. But the medical bills for her mother weren't going to pay themselves. She was 24, with tired eyes that had seen too much of the city's ugly side, yet she possessed a chameleon-like ability to blend into the background. "Table 4 needs a refresh, now." The floor manager, a sweaty man named Greg, hissed into her ear as he passed. "And don't look them in the eye. That's the Vanzetti table." Sarah's stomach tightened. Everyone knew the name. The Vanzetti crime family effectively ran the North Side. At the head of the table sat Dominic Vanzetti. Even from across the room, the man radiated a terrifying kind of gravity. He wasn't loud like the others. He was stillness personified. He wore a charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair slicked back, revealing a face that was handsome but hard like it was carved from granite. He was flanked by 3 men. To his right was Lorenzo, the snake, Ricci. His underboss, a man with a smile that never reached his eyes. To his left were his enforcers, huge men who looked like they chewed glass for breakfast. Sarah loaded her tray with fresh glasses and a new bottle of Macallan 25. She took a deep breath, composed her face into a mask of professional indifference, and approached the VIP booth. As she stepped into the circle of dim light surrounding the table, the conversation died down immediately. This was standard. Servants were furniture. You didn't talk business in front of the furniture, but you didn't ignore it either. You waited for it to leave. "Leave the bottle, sweetheart," Lorenzo said, his voice oily. He reached out his fingers, lingering a little too close to her hand as she set the crystal tumblers down. Sarah pulled back instinctively, keeping her eyes lowered. "Of course, sir." She began to pour. The golden liquid swirled into the glasses. She moved with practiced efficiency. Pour. 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 It was when she reached for Dominic's glass that she saw it. Lorenzo had been toying with his cufflink, a flashy diamond thing. But as Sarah had turned to grab the ice bucket, Lorenzo's hand had hovered over Dominic's tumbler for a split second. A fine white powder, no more than a pinch, cascaded from his sleeve into the amber liquid. It dissolved instantly. Sarah froze. It was a micro-movement. A blink, and you'd miss it. But Sarah had grown up in a house with a violent alcoholic stepfather. She had learned to read the slightest shift in body language, the tiniest flicker of aggression, the subtle sleight of hand that preceded a blow. She saw everything. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Poison. She looked up just for a second and caught Lorenzo's eyes. He was staring at Dominic, a look of hungry anticipation on his face. He hadn't seen Sarah notice. He thought she was just a dumb waitress, a pair of hands and a uniform. Dominic Vanzetti was currently looking at his phone, scrolling through a message, completely unaware that the man sitting 6 inches from him had just signed his death warrant. Panic flooded Sarah's system. If she said something, Lorenzo would deny it. They would drag her out to the alley and put a bullet in her head for accusing a made man. If she did nothing, Dominic Vanzetti would be dead in 10 minutes. She had to leave. She had to walk away. It wasn't her business. These were bad men doing bad things to each other. Let them kill each other, but as she looked at Dominic, she saw him sigh a heavy, exhausted sound. For a second the mask slipped, and he just looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. He reached for the glass. "Don't do it!" Sarah's mind screamed. She stepped forward to place a napkin down. "Ice, sir?" she asked, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Dominic paused, his hand hovering around the poisoned glass. He looked up at her, his steel grey eyes boring into hers. "No ice." "Right. My apologies," Sarah said. She picked up his glass, the poisoned one, ostensibly to move it closer to him or wipe the condensation. At the same time, she picked up Lorenzo's glass with her other hand, pretending to rearrange the table layout for the fresh bottle. It was a move she used to pull when she was a kid, hiding coins from her stepfather. The switch. With her back slightly turned to block Lorenzo's view, she crossed her hands. It was a fluid motion practiced 1,000 times with salt shakers and ketchup bottles in diners. She set the glasses back down. She placed the glass containing the powder in front of Lorenzo. She placed Lorenzo's clean glass in front of Dominic. "Enjoy, gentlemen," she whispered. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them behind her back. She turned to walk away, her legs feeling like jelly. Every nerve in her body was screaming that she had just made a fatal mistake. She had just intervened in a Mafia assassination. "Wait," a deep voice commanded. Sarah stopped. The blood drained from her face. It was Dominic. She turned around slowly. "Yes, sir." Dominic wasn't looking at his drink. He was looking at her. His gaze was intense, analytical. He looked from his glass to Lorenzo's glass, then back to Sarah. He hadn't seen the powder fall, but he had seen her hands move. He was a man who survived by noticing things that didn't add up. Why would a waitress shuffle 2 identical glasses of scotch? The silence stretched thick and suffocating. "What is your name?" Dominic asked, his voice low. "Sarah," she managed to choke out. "Sarah Miller." Dominic leaned back, his fingers drumming on the table. He didn't pick up the drink. Instead, he gestured to Lorenzo. "Drink up, Lorenzo," Dominic said softly. "To loyalty." Lorenzo laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. He reached for the glass that was originally Dominic's. The glass Sarah had moved. "To loyalty, boss," Lorenzo said, lifting the crystal tumbler. Sarah held her breath. She wanted to run, but her feet were rooted to the floor. Lorenzo brought the glass to his lips. He took a long, hearty swallow. Dominic watched him. He didn't drink. He just watched. 10 seconds passed. Lorenzo set the glass down, smiling. "Good batch, Dom. Smooth." Dominic's eyes flicked to Sarah. He saw the terror in her eyes. He saw the way she was gripping her tray until her knuckles turned white. And then he looked back at Lorenzo. Lorenzo's smile faltered. He coughed. A small cough at first, then a hacking wheeze. He reached for his throat. "Damn," he rasped. "Wrong pipe." But it wasn't the wrong pipe. Lorenzo's face began to turn a violent shade of red. He clawed at his collar, his eyes bulging. Foam began to gather at the corners of his mouth. The two enforcers jumped up, hands flying to their holsters, scanning the room for a threat. "Boss," one of them shouted. Dominic didn't move. He sat perfectly still like a statue, watching his underboss convulse on the leather banquette. Lorenzo slid off the seat, crashing onto the expensive floor, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Patrons screamed. Greg, the manager, came running over. Dominic stood up slowly. He buttoned his jacket. He looked down at the dying man, then lifted his gaze to Sarah. He walked over to her, ignoring the chaos, ignoring his dying friend. He stopped inches from her. He smelled of expensive cologne and rain. "You switched them," he stated. It wasn't a question. Sarah couldn't speak. She just nodded a tiny, jerky motion. Dominic stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a black business card with a single gold number on it. He slipped it into the pocket of her apron. "My driver is outside, a black SUV." Dominic said, his voice deadly calm. "Get in it, now, before the police come, before Lorenzo's men realize what you did." I can't," Sarah stammered. "My job." "You don't have a job anymore, Sarah," Dominic said, glancing at the dead body of Lorenzo Ricci on the floor. "And if you stay here, you won't have a life either. You just saved Dominic Vanzetti. That makes you the most dangerous waitress in Chicago." He turned to his enforcers. "Clean this up. Nobody talks to the cops until I say so." Dominic grabbed Sarah's arm firmly, but not painfully, and steered her toward the back exit. "Walk," he ordered. Sarah walked. She had just served her last drink at the Velvet Room. Her life as Sarah Miller, the invisible waitress, was over. She had stepped into the fire, and now she belonged to the boss. The interior of the black SUV was silent, a stark contrast to the chaos Sarah had just left behind at the Velvet Room. The leather seats were soft-smelling of cedar and cold air conditioning. The rain drummed rhythmically against the tinted glass, blurring the neon lights of Chicago into streaks of red and blue. Sarah sat pressed against the door, her knees pulled together, her hands gripping the fabric of her apron. She was still wearing her uniform. She felt ridiculous, small and terrified. Beside her sat Dominic Vanzetti. He was on his phone, typing rapidly. He hadn't looked at her since they got in. "Drive Frank," Dominic said to the man in the front seat. "Take the lower level. Whacker drive. Make sure we aren't followed." "Yes, boss," Frank grunted. The car surged forward, merging aggressively into traffic. Sarah's heart was still racing. She closed her eyes, and the image of Lorenzo's purple, contorted face flashed behind her eyelids. She had killed a man. Technically, he had killed himself with his own poison, but she had facilitated the execution. "Stop shaking!" Dominic's voice cut through the dark. Sarah opened her eyes. He had put the phone away and was watching her. In the passing streetlights, his face was a landscape of sharp angles and shadows. I need to go home," Sarah whispered. "My shift ends at 2. My mum calls me if I'm not home by 2. Dominic let out a short, humorless laugh. "You aren't going home, Sarah. You don't have a home right now. You have a target on your back. I saved you." She snapped a sudden spark of anger, cutting through the fear. "You said I saved your life. So let me go." Dominic shifted, turning his body fully toward her. The movement was predatory. "You did save me. Which begs the question, why? He leaned in closer. Lorenzo was my underboss. He's been with me for 10 years. If he wanted me dead, he had backing. Powerful backing. And here you are, a waitress making minimum wage, spotting a sleight of hand that my highly paid security missed. His eyes narrowed. Who are you really? Who sent you the Irish? The Russians? Sarah stared at him incredulous. Nobody sent me. I'm a waitress. I saw him put powder in your drink. I just didn't want to watch someone die. You switched the glasses, Dominic countered smoothly. You didn't scream. You didn't drop the tray. You executed a tactical switch. That requires nerves of steel or training. Which is it? It requires growing up in a house where you have to hide your tips from a drunk who will beat you if he finds them, Sarah yelled. The words spilled out before she could stop them. Tears pricked her eyes. I learned to be quick with my hands, so I wouldn't starve. That's my training, Mr. Vanzetti. Dominic went still. He studied her face, searching for a lie. He saw the frayed collar of her uniform, the dark circles under her eyes, the cheap shoes that were falling apart at the seams. He saw the desperation. Slowly, the tension in his shoulders dropped an inch. A drunk, huh? Stepfather, she muttered, looking out the window. Is he the one waiting for you at home? No, he's dead. It's just my mom. She's sick. Panic flared in her chest again. She needs her medicine. I have to be there. Dominic tapped the partition glass. Frank, call Dr. Aris. Tell him to go to the address on Sarah Miller's employment file. Tell him to take care of the mother. Full treatment. Put it on my tab. Sarah's head snapped up. What? How do you have my file? I own the building, Sarah. I own the restaurant. I own the block, Dominic said simply. And now I own your debt. I don't want your money, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. She was drowning in medical bills. It's not charity, Dominic said, adjusting his cuffs. It's a down payment. Until I figure out who backed Lorenzo, you are the only witness to his betrayal. That makes you valuable. And it makes you loose end for his partners. The car took a sharp turn, descending into the underground garage of a massive glass skyscraper, the Vanzetti Tower. You're staying with me, Dominic stated. Penthouse. You don't leave. You don't answer your phone. You don't look out the windows. For how long? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Dominic opened the door as the car came to a halt. He stepped out and offered her a hand. It was a gentleman's gesture at odds with the gun she saw holstered beneath his jacket. Until I've killed everyone who wants you dead, he said. Come on. Sarah hesitated, looking at his hand. It was large, scarred, and dangerous. But outside was a city that wanted to silence her. Inside was the monster she had saved. She took his hand. His grip was warm and firm. As he pulled her out of the car, she realized she had just made a deal with the devil. But at least the devil was paying her mother's medical bills. The penthouse was less a home and more a fortress of glass and steel. It floated above the Chicago skyline, disconnected from the grime and noise below. Everything was white, black, or chrome. It was cold, pristine, and expensive. 3 days had passed since the incident at the Velvet Room. Sarah stood in the massive kitchen, wearing a silk robe Dominic had provided because she had arrived with nothing but her soy sauce-stained apron. She felt like an imposter. She was stirring a cup of instant coffee she'd found hidden in the back of a pantry full of gourmet beans. She was safe, yes. But she was a prisoner. The elevator doors chimed and Dominic walked in. He looked exhausted. His suit was rumpled, his tie undone. He had been gone for 20 hours. He stopped when he saw her. He seemed surprised, as if he had forgotten he had a house guest. "You're awake," he said, tossing his keys onto the marble island. "It's 6:00 a.m., Sarah replied. "I'm used to the morning shift." Dominic walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water and drained half of it in one go. "Lorenzo's funeral is tomorrow," he said, wiping his mouth. "The official story is a heart attack, a tragedy." "And the unofficial story?" Sarah asked. Dominic looked at her. His eyes were dark, dangerous. "The unofficial story is that the families are restless. Lorenzo's brother, Tony Ricci, is asking questions. He doesn't believe the heart attack story. He wants to know who the waitress was." Sarah's grip on her mug tightened. "Does he know my name?" "Not yet," Dominic said. "I scrubbed the employment records at the restaurant before the police arrived. Greg, your manager, has been paid to keep his mouth shut. But Tony is a dog with a bone. He's sniffing around." Dominic walked around the island and stood in front of her. The distance between them closed. For a Mafia boss, he was surprisingly quiet when he moved. "My men went to your apartment," he said softly. Sarah froze. "My mum, she's fine. She's at a private clinic now. Top tier. She's comfortable." Dominic paused, his expression shifting to something softer, almost pitying. "They found your eviction notices, Sarah, and the letters from the loan sharks." Sarah felt a flush of shame heat her cheeks. She looked down. "I was handling it." "You owe $40,000 to the East Side gang," Dominic said. "That's not handling it. That's drowning." "I didn't ask for your help," she whispered. "You saved my life." Dominic repeated the intensity returning to his voice. He reached out and tilted her chin up with one finger, forcing her to look at him. "Do you know how much my life is worth, Sarah?" Her breath hitched. His eyes were mesmerizing grey storms that threatened to swallow her whole. "More than 40,000, she managed to say. "Considerably," he murmured. His thumb brushed her jawline a touch that sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. "I paid the debt. The sharks won't bother you again." Sarah pulled back, overwhelmed. "Why? Why are you doing this? You could just hide me in a motel." "Because," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, "I don't like owing people, and because you intrigue me." Before Sarah could process that, the intercom on the wall buzzed, a harsh, jagged sound. Dominic stepped back instantly, the moment broken. He pressed the button. "Report. Boss." It was Frank's voice, tight with urgency. "We have a situation. Tony Ricci is in the lobby. He says he knows you have the girl. He's demanding to come up." Sarah's blood ran cold. Dominic's face hardened into stone. The exhausted man from seconds ago vanished, replaced by the King of Chicago. "How many men does he have?" Dominic asked. 6, heavily armed. They're claiming it's a friendly visit to pay respects, but they're geared up. Dominic looked at Sarah. "Go to the safe room. Master bedroom behind the walk-in closet. Keypad code is 1925. Do not come out until I come get you." "Dominic," Sarah started. "Go!" he roared. Sarah scrambled back, dropping her mug. It shattered on the floor, coffee splashing over the pristine white marble. She didn't look back. She ran toward the bedroom. As she reached the door, she heard the elevator chime. The heavy, distinct sound of a gun slide being racked back echoed through the penthouse. "Welcome, Tony," she heard Dominic say, his voice smooth as silk but sharp as a razor. "To what do I owe the pleasure at this ungodly hour?" "Cut the crap, Dom," a rough voice answered. "I want the girl, the one who poisoned my brother." Sarah gasped. The one who poisoned my brother. They were spinning it. They were blaming her for Lorenzo's death. She slammed the bedroom door and locked it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was the scapegoat, and if Dominic handed her over, she was dead. She ran into the closet, pushing aside rows of expensive Italian suits, searching for the panel Dominic had mentioned. Blam! A gunshot rang out in the living room. Then another. Then the sound of shattering glass. Sarah found the keypad. Her shaking fingers punched in 1925. The wall hissed and popped open. She stepped into the dark, steel-lined room. But before the door could close, she heard a shout of pain, Dominic's voice. Sarah hesitated. The heavy steel door was sliding shut. She could stay safe, hidden in the dark. Or she could do something stupid. She remembered the way he had looked at her in the kitchen. I paid the debt. She couldn't leave him to die. Not after he saved her mother. Sarah looked around the safe room. It was stocked with weapons cache and monitors showing the security feed. On the screen, she saw the living room. Dominic was pinned behind the marble island, bleeding from his shoulder. 3 men were advancing on him. Sarah's eyes landed on a fire alarm lever inside the safe room. And next to it, the controls for the penthouse's automated blackout shutters. She didn't know how to shoot a gun, but she knew how to create chaos. "Time for another switch," she whispered. She slammed her hand onto the blackout button, plunging the penthouse into darkness, and then pulled the fire alarm. The room on the screen went black, and strobing emergency lights began to flash. Sarah grabbed a heavy flashlight from the shelf and ran back out toward the chaos. The penthouse plunged into chaos. The overhead lights died, replaced instantly by the rhythmic, blinding strobe of the emergency system. Flash. Darkness. Flash. Darkness. The siren wailed a deafening mechanical scream that made communication impossible. Sarah crouched behind a heavy leather armchair, her heart thumping so hard she could feel it in her throat. She gripped the heavy flashlight like a club. In the strobing light, she saw movement. Tony Ricci's men were disoriented. They shouted to each other, but their voices were swallowed by the siren. They were turning in circles, their night vision ruined by the sudden flashes. Dominic was still behind the marble island. He hadn't moved. One of the gunmen, a brute with a shaved head, stumbled toward Sarah's position, his weapon raised. He didn't see her. He was looking toward the bedroom hallway, expecting the girl to be cowering in the safe room. Sarah waited. She thought of her mother, weak and pale in a hospital bed. She thought of the years she spent invisible serving drinks to men who looked through her. She wasn't invisible now. As the gunman passed the armchair, Sarah lunged. She didn't swing for his head. She wasn't strong enough to knock him out. Instead, she clicked the high-beam flashlight on, jamming it directly into his eyes, and kicked the back of his knee with everything she had. The man roared, blinded and off balance. He buckled his gun, discharging wildly into the ceiling. Flash. Dominic appeared. He moved like a ghost in the flickering light. He vaulted over the kitchen island, his left arm hanging uselessly by his side, his right hand holding his pistol with terrifying stability. Bang! Bang! 2 shots, 2 bodies hit the floor. Dominic didn't hesitate. He advanced on the blinded gunman Sarah had tripped. 1 efficient strike with the pistol grip, and the man crumpled. Tony Ricci was screaming somewhere near the elevator. "Retreat! It's a setup! Get us out!" The elevator doors chimed a cheerful sound amidst the violence. Tony and his 2 remaining men scrambled inside, firing blindly back into the room as the doors slid shut. Silence returned as the elevator descended, broken only by the incessant wail of the fire alarm. Dominic stood in the center of the room, silhouetted by the flashing red lights. He swayed slightly. "Dominic!" Sarah scrambled up, dropping the flashlight. He turned toward her. The adrenaline was fading and the pain was taking over. His knees gave way. Sarah caught him before he hit the floor, her small frame straining under his weight. They collapsed together onto the expensive rug, now stained with blood. "You!" Dominic gritted out, his teeth clenched. "I gave you an order." "I told you," Sarah said, her hands hovering over his shoulder. The bullet had torn through the deltoid. It was bleeding heavily, soaking his white shirt crimson. "I don't listen well. You could have died," he rasped, his eyes fluttering shut. "Stay with me," Sarah commanded. She ripped the silk belt off her robe and wrapped it tightly around his upper arm, creating a makeshift tourniquet. Dominic groaned, a guttural sound of agony. I know," she whispered, tying the knot tight. Her hands were covered in his blood. It was warm and sticky. Frank, where are you?" she yelled at the ceiling, hoping the intercom still worked. The front door burst open. It wasn't Tony. It was Frank and the security team, weapons drawn. They swept the room in seconds. "Boss is down," Frank shouted, holstering his weapon and rushing over. "He's losing blood," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "The bullet went through, I think. There's an exit wound, but the artery might be nicked." Frank looked at her, then at the tourniquet. He looked at the bodies on the floor, then back to her. A newfound respect flickered in his eyes. "We can't go to a hospital," Frank said. "Tony will have eyes at every ER in the city by now. We have to go to the safe house. Sarah, keep pressure on that wound." "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah said firmly. "Unless I'm in the car with him." Frank nodded. "Let's move." They lifted Dominic. He was barely conscious, his skin pale and clammy. As they rushed him toward the service elevator, his hand reached out blindly, grasping. Sarah took his hand. "I'm here." He squeezed her fingers, weak but desperate. "Don't leave." "I'm not leaving," she vowed. And she realized with a jolt of terror that she meant it. She wasn't just staying because she had nowhere to go. She was staying because for the first time in her life, someone had bled for her. The safe house was a misnomer. It was a sprawling, brutalist concrete mansion on the edge of Lake Michigan, surrounded by 10-foot walls and patrolled by men with assault rifles. It was a fortress. 2 days had passed since the shootout. Sarah sat in a velvet chair by the window, watching the grey waves crash against the shore. The sky was the color of a bruise. The door to the master bedroom creaked open. Dominic lay in the massive bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged. He was shirtless, the sheet pulled up to his waist. His chest was a road map of scars, knife wounds, bullet holes, burns. A history of violence written on skin. He stirred, his eyes opening. They were clear, the fog of painkillers gone. Sarah stood up immediately. "Water," Dominic nodded. She poured a glass from the carafe on the nightstand and held it to his lips. He drank greedily, then fell back against the pillows. "How long?" he asked. His voice was gravel. 2 days, Sarah said. "Dr. Aris came. He stitched you up. He said you were lucky the bullet missed the bone." Dominic looked at her. She was wearing clean clothes, jeans, and a cashmere sweater that Frank had procured for her. She looked tired but composed. "Tony?" Dominic asked. "In the wind," Sarah replied. She had been listening to Frank's reports. "He's telling everyone you lost your mind, that you killed Lorenzo without cause. He's rallying the other families against you. The commission is calling for a sit-down." Dominic let out a low growl. "He's trying to stage a coup. If the commission thinks I'm unstable, they'll sanction a hit. Open season on the Vanzetti family." He tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his shoulder. "Stop," Sarah said, putting a hand on his chest to push him back. "You need to rest." "I don't have time to rest," Dominic snapped. "I have a war to fight, and you need to leave. Frank has a plane waiting. We're sending you to Italy, Tuscany. You'll be safe there." Sarah stiffened. She pulled her hand back. "No." Dominic blinked. "Excuse me." "I said no." Sarah said, her voice rising. "I'm not running away. I'm already involved, Dominic. Tony saw me. His men saw me. If you send me to Italy, I'm just a sitting duck waiting to be found. My best chance of survival is right here next to the man with the army." "It's not safe next to me," Dominic roared, ignoring the pain. "Look at me, Sarah. I'm shot. My own underboss poisoned me. My fortress was breached. I am death-walking. I am trying to save you." "You didn't save me," Sarah yelled back. "I saved you twice." The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic stared at her. His chest heaved. Anger warred with admiration in his eyes. "Why?" he asked again, softer this time. "Why do you fight so hard for a man you barely know?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "Because you kept your word. You paid my debt. You helped my mother. In my world, nobody helps anyone unless they want something. You did it before you even knew if I'd survive the night." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "And because I hate bullies. Tony Ricci is a bully, just like my stepfather. I'm done running from men like that." Dominic watched her for a long time. The silence stretched heavy and charged. The air between them crackled with something that wasn't just gratitude. It was attraction, raw and dangerous. "Come here," Dominic whispered. Sarah hesitated, then stepped closer to the bed. Dominic reached out with his good hand and took hers. He pulled her down so she was sitting on the edge of the mattress. "If you stay," he said, his voice intense, "there is no going back. You become part of the family. You become mine. And my enemies become your enemies." "I know," Sarah said. "And," Dominic continued, his thumb tracing the veins in her wrist, "we have to change the narrative. Tony says I'm weak, that I'm unstable. We're going to prove him wrong." "How?" "The gala," Dominic said. "The mayor's charity ball is on Saturday. Every major player in the city will be there. The commission, the politicians, the press. Tony will be there gloating, expecting me to be in hiding or dead." A dark smile spread across Dominic's face. It was the smile of the wolf who had just spotted the sheep. "We're going to walk in the front door," Dominic said. "Together." Sarah's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm a waitress." "Not anymore," Dominic said. "Tonight we kill Sarah Miller. Tomorrow you are Sophia Vanzetti, my fiancée." Sarah gasped. "Fiancée?" "It's the only way to explain your presence and protect you." Dominic said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Under the old laws, a Don's wife is untouchable. If they touch you, it's total war. It buys us time." He squeezed her hand. "Can you play the part? Sarah, Can you look a room full of killers in the eye and make them believe you belong on the throne? Sarah thought of the customers who had snapped their fingers at her. She thought of the manager who had belittled her. She thought of the fear she had lived with for 24 years. She straightened her spine. Her expression hardened, mirroring Dominic's. "I can do better than that," Sarah said. "I can make them wish they never looked at me at all." Dominic smirked. "Good. Then call Frank. Tell him to get the tailor. We have work to do." Saturday night arrived wrapped in a velvet fog, the city lights of Chicago shimmering like diamonds, scattered on black velvet. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House. Hilton was alive with the hum of the city's elite. Senators, judges, and the heads of the 5 families mingled over champagne, their smiles tight, their eyes calculating. The air was thick with rumors. Everyone had heard that Dominic Vanzetti was dead or dying or on the run. Tony Ricci had spent the last hour holding court near the orchestra, laughing loudly, his hand resting possessively on the shoulder of a corrupt police commissioner. Tony was already acting like the Don. Then the heavy oak doors swung open. The room didn't just go quiet. The silence slammed into the crowd like a physical force. The orchestra faltered, a violinist missing a beat, causing a discordant screech that echoed in the sudden stillness. Dominic Vanzetti stood in the archway. He was not dead. He was not hiding. He was wearing a bespoke tuxedo that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, his injured arm resting naturally at his side, hiding the bandages beneath the black wool. He looked like a god of war returning from a conquest. But it was the woman on his arm who stole the oxygen from the room. Sarah Miller was gone. In her place stood a vision in blood-red silk. The gown was backless, cascading down her frame like liquid fire. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, was now a glossy waterfall of dark waves over one shoulder. Diamonds, Vanzetti heirlooms glittered at her throat and ears. But the biggest change wasn't the dress or the jewels. It was her eyes. Gone was the submissive, terrified look of the waitress. Her chin was lifted, her gaze sweeping the room with a cool, bored detachment that Dominic had spent the last 24 hours teaching her. "Head up," Dominic whispered, his voice barely audible. "You own the floor." "I own the floor," Sarah repeated internally. She tightened her grip on his good arm. They walked. It was a slow, deliberate procession. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Sarah could feel the stares, judgment, envy, confusion. She saw Greg, her old manager from the Velvet Room, serving drinks near a pillar. His jaw dropped his tray, tilting dangerously as he recognized her. Sarah didn't blink. She looked right through him, as if he were part of the wallpaper. Tony Ricci's smile vanished. He stood frozen, his face draining of color. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. Dominic steered Sarah straight toward Tony. The crowd closed in behind them, sensing blood. "Tony," Dominic said, his voice smooth and projecting easily across the circle of onlookers. "You look surprised. Were you expecting someone else?" Tony swallowed hard, recovering his composure. He forced a sneer. "Dominic, we heard you were indisposed. A heart issue, wasn't it? Just a minor injury," Dominic said, his eyes hard as flint. "A workplace hazard. But I'm feeling much better. In fact, I've never been better." He turned to Sarah, lifting her hand to his lips. "I'd like to introduce everyone to Sophia, my fiancée." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Tony laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Fiancé. Come on, Dom." We know who she is. I saw the security footage from the Velvet Room before you wiped it. That's the waitress. The help. You're bringing a tray carrier to the mayor's ball." The insult hung in the air. The other mob bosses exchanged glances. Marrying a civilian, a servant, was seen as a weakness. Sarah felt Dominic tense, ready to strike, but she squeezed his arm. "Let me her touch," said. Sarah stepped forward, releasing Dominic's arm. She closed the distance to Tony, invading his personal space. She was shorter than him, but in her heels she stared directly into his sweating face. "Mr. Ricci," Sarah said, her voice clear and melodic, lacking any trace of the tremor she felt inside. "It's interesting you mentioned the Velvet Room." "Is it?" Tony scoffed. "Go get me a drink, sweetheart. Maybe you'll remember your place." "I remember everything," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a chilly whisper that the surrounding circle strained to hear. "I remember the bottle of Macallan 25. I remember the table by the window. And I remember seeing your brother Lorenzo slip a packet of powder into Dominic's glass." Tony's eyes widened. "You lying bitch." "And I remember," Sarah cut him off, raising her voice slightly, "that when Lorenzo died, he didn't call for a doctor. He called you. But you didn't answer, did you, Tony?" The crowd murmured. This was a direct accusation of fratricide and betrayal. "You switched the glasses," Tony shouted, losing his cool. "You killed him." "I served a drink," Sarah said innocently. "If Lorenzo's drink was poisoned, who put the poison there, Tony? He was sitting next to Dominic. I was at the bar. The only person who touched that glass was Lorenzo." She took a step closer. "And the only person who benefits from Dominic dying, and Lorenzo dying, is the man next in line. You." Tony's face turned purple. "I'll kill you right here." He reached inside his jacket. It was the mistake Dominic had been waiting for. Before Tony's hand could clear his lapel, 3 of Dominic's men materialized from the crowd. At the same time, the police commissioner, the one Tony had been laughing with, stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Tony's shoulder. "Don't do it, Tony," the commissioner said quietly. "Get off me," Tony snarled. "We have the autopsy report, Tony." Dominic spoke up, his voice booming like a gavel. "And we have the phone records. Lorenzo texted you 5 minutes before he died. It's done. He thought he killed me, but you let him drink the backup glass, didn't you? You wanted us both gone so you could take the throne." Dominic gestured to the room. "Treason. By the laws of the Commission, the punishment is death. But tonight is a charity ball. We are civilized men." Dominic looked at the commissioner. "Get this garbage out of my sight." Tony Ricci was dragged away, kicking and screaming, shouting obscenities that were swallowed by the polished elegance of the ballroom. As the doors closed behind him, Dominic turned back to the crowd. He took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and raised it. "To loyalty," Dominic said. "To loyalty." The room echoed in unison, the elite of Chicago bowing their heads to the undisputed king. Dominic turned to Sarah. His eyes were burning with an emotion she had never seen there before. Pride, and something deeper. "You did good, Sophia," he whispered. "Sarah," she corrected him, smiling for the first time that night. "My name is Sarah." "Dance with me, Sarah," Dominic said, pulling her onto the floor. As the music swelled, Sarah rested her head against his chest. She could hear his heart beating strong, steady, and alive. She wasn't the girl who hid in the shadows anymore. She had walked into the fire and come out holding the flame. The ride back to the penthouse was executed in silence, But it wasn't the terrified silence of the ride 3 days ago. This silence was heavy electric and vibrating with the aftershocks of adrenaline. Sarah stared out the window of the armored SUV. The city blurred past a streak of neon and wet asphalt. Her reflection in the dark glass looked like a stranger. The red silk dress was wrinkled now, the diamond earrings heavy against her lobes. But the face was different. The fear that had etched lines around her mouth for years was gone, replaced by a strange, cold calm. She had looked a man in the eye and sentenced him to death. And God help her, she didn't feel guilty. She felt powerful. Beside her, Dominic Vanzetti was a statue. He held his injured arm stiffly against his ribs, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He was already calculating, strategizing, moving pieces on a mental chessboard that never stopped shifting. The car pulled into the underground garage of the Vanzetti Tower. Frank opened the door, his face solemn. "The commission is satisfied, boss," Frank murmured. "They're calling it justice. Tony's body has been taken care of." Dominic nodded a sharp, singular motion. "Double the guard on the lobby. I want sweeps every hour. Tonight was a victory, but victory makes people careless." "Understood." Dominic turned to Sarah. He didn't offer his hand this time. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable, and walked toward the elevator. Sarah followed the click of her heels echoing like gunshots in the empty concrete bunker. The elevator ride up was suffocating. The air between them was thick enough to choke on. When the doors slid open to the penthouse, the lights were dim, casting long shadows across the white marble floors. It felt less like a home and more like the inside of a mausoleum. Dominic walked straight to the bar, the same bar where he had almost died days ago. He poured 2 glasses of brandy with his good hand. He didn't turn around when he spoke. "You have a flight at 9:00 a.m. Sarah stopped in the middle of the room. The words hit her harder than a slap. "Excuse me." Dominic turned, holding out one of the glasses. His face was a mask of stone. "Milan. First class. I've set up an account in your name with $5 million. It's enough to buy a villa, start a business, do whatever you want. You'll have a new passport. A clean slate." Sarah didn't take the glass. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "I didn't ask for a villa." "It doesn't matter what you asked for," Dominic said, his voice dropping to that dangerous low rumble. "Tonight was necessary. We had to play the part to survive. But the play is over, Sarah. Tony is dead. The immediate threat is gone." "So I'm dismissed?" Sarah asked, her voice rising. "Like a servant. Good job, here's your tip, get it out." "I am trying to save your life." Dominic slammed the glass down on the counter, the amber liquid sloshing over the rim. The sudden violence of the motion made her flinch, but she didn't step back. He stalked toward her, closing the distance until he towered over her. "Do you think tonight was a game? Do you think because you wore a pretty dress and said a few tough lines that you're ready for this? Tony was just one man. There are 10 others waiting to take his place. There are feds who watch my garbage. There are assassins who would kill you just to see me frown." He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "You are a civilian. You are a waitress who got lucky. Take the money. Go to Italy. Find a nice man who doesn't have a price on his head and live a long, boring life. Because if you stay here, you will die. Or worse, you will become like me." Sarah looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the physical pain of his wound. But beneath that, She saw the terror. He wasn't afraid of his enemies. He was afraid of destroying her. Slowly, deliberately, Sarah reached up and unclasped the diamond necklace he had given her. It pooled in her hand like cold water. She dropped it onto the marble floor. Clatter. Then she took off the earrings. Clatter. Clatter. "I'm not a civilian," she said softly. "Not anymore." She stepped closer, moving into his personal space, forcing him to look down at her. "Tonight, while you were talking to the commissioner, did you notice the man in the grey suit standing by the kitchen doors?" she asked. Dominic frowned, confused by the pivot. "What? The man in the grey suit?" Sarah repeated. "He wasn't drinking. He wasn't watching the stage. He was watching Frank. He was counting your security detail. He checked his watch 3 times in 1 minute." Dominic went still. That was Castellano's nephew. He's supposed to be neutral. "He's not neutral," Sarah said firmly. "He was signaling the wait staff. I saw him slip a napkin to the bartender who just happened to disappear right before Tony made his move." Dominic stared at her, his mind racing, connecting the dots she was laying out. "And," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength, "when we left, I saw the way your trusted Capo Sal looked at you. He didn't look relieved that you were alive, Dominic. He looked disappointed." She poked him in the chest. "You see the big picture. You see the wars and the territories. But you miss the details. You miss the poison in the glass. You miss the signals in the crowd. You need eyes in the back of your head." She took a breath, her eyes locking onto his. "I am those eyes, Dominic. You can send me to Italy. You can force me on that plane. But without me, you'll be dead in 6 months. And I won't be there to switch the glass next time." The silence that followed was absolute. The wind howled softly against the panoramic windows. Dominic looked at her, as if he was seeing her for the first time. He saw the intelligence, the ruthless observation skills, the spine of steel that had been forged in a lifetime of surviving abusive men. She wasn't a damsel he had saved. She was a weapon he hadn't realized he was wielding. "You're blackmailing me," he whispered, a hint of awe in his voice. "With my own survival." "I'm negotiating," Sarah corrected. "Business." Dominic let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. His shoulders slumped slightly, the armor cracking. He reached out his hand, trembling slightly, and traced the line of her jaw. "If you stay," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "there is no exit strategy. You understand that no divorce, no retirement. We walk this road until one of us is in the ground." "I've been alone my whole life, Dominic," Sarah said, leaning into his touch. "I've been invisible. Tonight was the first time I felt real. I'm not going back to being a ghost. I'd rather burn with you than fade away alone." Dominic groaned a sound of defeat and desire and pulled her into him. His good arm wrapped around her waist, crushing her against his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of her perfume and the lingering smoke of the gala. "God help me," he muttered against her skin. "I should put you on that plane. I should make you leave." "But you won't," she whispered. He pulled back to look at her. "No, I won't." He kissed her then. It wasn't the theatrical kiss of the ballroom. It was desperate, raw, and consuming. It was a seal on a blood oath. In the cold light of the penthouse, amidst the wreckage of their old lives, they were forging something new. Dominic broke the kiss, breathless. He walked over to the wall safe, hidden behind a painting. He punched in the code, the beeps echoing in the quiet room. He pulled out a small velvet box. He returned to her. He didn't kneel. Kings don't kneel, and queens don't expect them to. He simply opened the box. Inside sat a ring. Not a diamond. It was a ruby, dark as blood, set in black gold. The Vanzetti family ring. It had belonged to his grandmother, the matriarch, who had built the empire from nothing. "This isn't just a ring," Dominic said seriously. "It's a target. Wearing this means you are the matriarch. It means when they can't get to me, they will come for you." Sarah took the ring from the box. She looked at the deep-redded stone, seeing her own reflection in its facets. It looked like a drop of the poison that had started it all. She slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Let them come," Sarah said, her eyes flashing with a cold, beautiful fire. "I'll have a drink waiting for them." Dominic smiled, a genuine, dangerous smile that promised hell for anyone who dared cross them. He walked to the window and looked out at the city as the sun began to breach the horizon, painting the Chicago skyline in violent strokes of orange and purple. "Frank," Dominic said, speaking into the air, knowing his head of security was listening on the monitor. "Yes, boss." Frank's voice crackled over the intercom. "Cancel the flight to Milan." Dominic ordered, his arm draped around Sarah's shoulders. "And tell the crew to get ready. We have a meeting with Sal and Castellano's nephew in 1 hour." "Understood, boss. And congratulations." Sarah leaned her head on Dominic's shoulder, watching the sun rise over their kingdom. She wasn't Sarah Miller, the invisible waitress, anymore. She wasn't even just a survivor. She was Sophia Vanzetti. She was the queen of Chicago. And she had a lot of work to do. "One thing, Dominic," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Name it. The coffee in this penthouse is criminal. If I'm running this city, we're getting a professional espresso machine, and a barista who knows how to use it." Dominic laughed, the sound warm and rich. "I think we can arrange that." He pulled her closer as the new day broke. The darkness had passed, but for the underworld of Chicago, the real storm was just beginning. And for the first time, the king wasn't facing it alone. And that is the story of how Sarah Miller went from serving drinks to ruling the city. She proved that in a world of brute force, the sharpest weapon is observation. Dominic Vanzetti found the one thing money couldn't buy: a partner who could see the knives coming before they were even drawn. Together they became the most feared power couple in Chicago history. What did you think of Sarah's transformation? Do you think she made the right choice staying with Dominic? Or should she have taken the money and run? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of danger, romance, and revenge, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. We have amazing new stories coming every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Thanks for watching.